This episode is brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe. Hello there, Tando Book Club lovers. This season, we're going on a deep dive with some of Africa's female thought leaders. Joining me today as our guest for a 3-episode special is Thembe Khumalo. Thembe Khumalo is a Zimbabwean-born storyteller. She was first published as a columnist in Newsday, which at the time was the country's largest independent newspaper, and her column was called Local Drummer. She went on to write Southern Sister, another weekly column for the Southern Eye. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she released a collection of meditations as an e-book called Words for Work. She is currently working on her first novel, and Words and Other Weapons is her first compilation in print. A brand strategist and personal branding coach, Thembe has over the years produced large volumes of content on the subjects of corporate communication, personal branding, and brand strategy, including hosting a Pan-African podcast called Brand to Build on behalf of a consulting firm, Brand Builder Africa. Born at Mchabezi Mission in rural Matabeleland, Thembe is a mother of 2 almost adult daughters. She attended the Dominican convent in Bulawayo and now lives in Harare with her husband. She holds a BA in Media Studies and an MBA from Africa Leadership University. You can find out more about Thembe on her website www.thembekhumalo.com, or you can follow her on social media with the handle @Thembe Khumalo. As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of our book discussion. Naturally, we've chosen a quote from Thembe's book, Words and Other Weapons. In a vast majority of African communities, women love men. Women build families, homesteads, and legacies with men. It is therefore imperative that we look for a different language to describe our aspirations toward equality of the sexes. If we genuinely desire peace and prosperity for men and women alike, if our goal is to have harmony in homes and communities, if we aim to create empathy and understanding between men and women, then we need to change the language we use to describe this process of discovery. We cannot use the language of war to describe a process of creating agreement. And this piece is from Women Love Men. Welcome back, Thembe.
Thank you, Selena. Excited to be here once again.
Yes, we're very excited to pick your brain about this book. So in today's episode, we really want to explore the theme of relationships. Particularly in this book, you explore the theme of women and relationships with their world, friends, families, their own expectations of it all, the expectations that come to them from those places in work, love, and friendships. So what is your value from the perspective, or your view of the perspective of the gender divide, something that's often been talked about in development circles that speaks to this opening quote that we began with? Is it possible to ever actually navigate some bridging of that divide? How real is the divide? How imagined is the divide?
Well, those are really $6 million questions. So I feel like I'm at around 18 million. Most people are just people trying to get on with their lives and be happy and make sense and meaning out of their lot. And I think for me, it's the simplicity of men and women and families and communities just trying to get by is where the focus is. There are, of course, bigger conversations, bigger discussions, but at the heart of it all, what do we all want? And I think that's where we've got to keep coming back to the heart. At the heart of it all, what do I want? What do you want? We want to live well. We want to be happy at home. To be happy at home, for me, is one of the biggest privileges that I experience. Because if you're not happy at home, where can you be happy? Like, that's why it's home, right? And again, I feel like that's where we've got to keep coming back to. So, how can we build a world in which all of us are happy at home? Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way you simplified it, but really just made it down to earth. Like, this is really actually what it's all about. And sometimes I do think a lot of the language we use today overcomplicates things. We get to a point where we lose meaning of what it is we're trying to achieve. It strikes me, this issue around the gender divide, particularly the way it's explored in the story Women Love Men. And one of the questions that sort of came up for me is that burden of the gender divide more difficult for women to navigate or just as difficult for men to navigate? Do you think we place it more on the woman than the men? Do you think for men this is just like, oh, these are cute words, let's just go and do what we're doing? Like, what's your take on that?
You know, I think it's hard being a man in the 21st century. Genuinely, I think it's complicated and it's difficult to know what your job is and who you're supposed to be, how to relate to everyone who's not a man. And I think there's injustice in those conversations, because a lot of what we practice is what we learn in community, in society. So we come into a world that's got things going on and we become part of the things going on. And then someone says, oh, this is wrong. You're wrong to feel this way. You're wrong to act this way. You must fix it. And then you go, okay, this is how I'm going to fix it. But in the meantime, your world is still doing the things that it's always done. So now you're living in the world, in your head, in this other story that someone else is telling. It's complicated, Selena.
Yeah.
It's very complicated, and I think it's very hard for all of us. Yeah.
Just whilst we're camping on Women Love Men, because I got some other stories I want to unpack, but before we leave Women Love Men, our protagonist is in a dialogue. So in the story, she's in a dialogue with some development practitioners around inequality. And through this exchange, there's a usage of language being explored. She's doing it internally, but they are actually having a dialogue about language, right? I found that dual play or that parallel conversation very, very clever, very, very nice.
One of the rare instances in which I am actually as clever as you think.
So I really, really like that. I wanted to find out, you've at the table, or the other characters in the story, you've got two Europeans and a man, and they are actually talking about equality, empowerment, about a group of people which none of them represent. Do you see a place and space where Black women can be at that table as the decision makers instead of asking for permission on the other side, like Thabo, our protagonist, is? And what do you think would need to happen for that to take place?
I mean, I think it's already happening, just to a lesser extent, and probably it will continue to increase. What's funny, though, is that traditionally, African women have a lot of power. In the traditional community setup, they are not disempowered underlings that are treated like minors. They are people with key roles that they play in the family setting and in the community. And so this mythology of traditional cultural Africa being a place where women were treated badly and had no rights and were disempowered is actually a myth. And I think if we keep coming home to who were we before somebody told us we were disempowered. That could help us a lot.
And definitely, I think the amplification of a few bad stories to speak for a whole group of people is what we also see playing out there. Because, nothing's as sexy as bad news. Nothing moves faster than something that is negative, but really powerful that actually we had already begun to define this for ourselves in our authentic African identity. To now move away from women love men, because I could camp there all day long. Workplaces in general are part of the world building of most of your fiction stories. So even if the theme is something else, it's there, it's in the background. We see it in the unwritten, which is about a particular issue to do with violence with women, but she is also exploring that in her workplace setting. In the story Cards, it's a relationship between a man and a woman, but definitely there's a strong workplace setting. And Packing, there's a strong workplace setting. So what kind of took me or had me pause was that in all of those shadows of the workplace, there was different pressures and different sort of expectations being put at the protagonist in those different stories. And what I found interesting is for some women, it looked like it was a place of freedom, but only temporarily, only for a little piece of time. Is it possible for African women to find the true freedom they desire, or a place called home in the world of work?
Yes. I mean, I think when you're doing work that you love, it's fantastic. It is home. It feels like home. When you're working with people you respect and admire, that makes a huge difference and again feels like home. But I think also the realistic expectation that as much as we can have it all and do it all, we can't have it all at the same time, and we can't do it all at the same time. That we've got to allow life to have seasons, because that is the nature of life. That there will be seasons for intense focus on the work of earning a living, and other seasons where you will be more interested in the work of creating a family, a home. And so just yielding to that seasonality in your life, I think is helpful.
Very, very interesting talking about seasons, because you have to be, I think, quite intentional about moving your life forward on a particular trajectory to even harness and appreciate the power of seasons. That was then, this is now. This is the season we're in. Now we need to move into the next season. Because I do find with women and the world of work, much like you said before earlier in this conversation, you can so easily become trapped in a narrative. And now we have days and months for the narrative. So we've got Women's Day in International Women's Day in March, and Women's Month in August, and Day of the Girl Child in October, and
16 days of activism.
Exactly, and those aren't actually about us. That is a bigger story benefiting someone else. But you can so easily, because the noise is so strongly, get trapped in that story and then become a stranger in your own life and kind of be a foreigner and wonder. In the story Hen Party, which is now where we really see friendship on display. And this one for me, Thembe, was I had to actually put the book down.
Why?
Spend some time, just reflecting on, because there was a number of things, because each one of those friends, I think, displayed a particular world view, right? That all women can engage with. But what I found particularly interesting was the one line of advice to the bride-to-be at the end of the book. And before, I want to unpack each one of them with you, because I'd like you to elaborate on them, even though they were one line. But before we get into that, when you were writing that piece and concluding the story, was it a moment of, let me give this character the last word? Were you saying something bigger to the rest of the world? Like, look at these people. These are the people in your life. This is what they do. Or were you bringing together actually a whole piece of advice, just using 5 different voices, and together that's the punch, the final punch that you wanted to throw?
That's what you said.
Thembe, okay.
So what I wanted to do with that story was just to showcase the complexity of relationships. That we can be friends, but inside our friendships, there are valleys and mountains and territories and landmines and rivers to cross and all of these things that don't make us not friends. Like, we're still friends. And how do we create a life of friendship with these things between us and inside us? Yeah.
Do you think the friends, when they were giving the advice, because this is the question I had, I was like, with our friends, there are times when they can see us so clearly because they're not inside our heads. And they're like, this is going where it's going. And I can't stop the fire. So, and I can't put out the fire myself. So all I can do is point this person to a fire extinguisher for when they're ready. Was there an echo of that in these ladies' advice? Do you think they sussed out that this situation, we don't know?
No, I think each woman gave advice according to her worldview. Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack that advice. The first one was from Chiedza, who seemed quite dispassionate about everything. And that one, yet is also always invited. Once you made your bed, you have to lie in it.
Because that's Chiedza's experience of life.
Really?
I mean, that's...
You don't think there could be more for her? You don't think there are other possibilities for her?
I think there are, but Chiedza has to know that.
Wow.
And until she does, this is all there is.
Okay.
I mean, you and I can have coffee with Chiedza.
I would love to, because her name means hope, and there's not much hope in what she's saying. So I found that juxtaposition of I don't know if you did that on purpose.
Listen, I'm not that clever.
Okay, then the next piece of advice: watch out for those wicked in-laws. Short, to the point, but also quite cynical.
Again, that was her experience of life. Yeah. And I think actually it's what we do, isn't it? We do tend to give advice based on our life, not the life of the person we're advising, which is kind of wild, because her life could be completely different, her priorities could be different, but we're still there telling ourselves into her story.
But do you think, Thembe, and this is something I am very curious about, and I'm curious about it in terms of, do you see the world in this way? Do you look at friends, family, other people and be like, and when you intersect with them, you're being like, I'm seeing Selena in her story. So I am surveying this with curiosity, surveying this from the perspective of her story, not my story. Is that how you see the world? And do you think it's actually possible for people to maintain that perspective or point of view in their relationships?
I think you have to be very disciplined to do that. I would love to say that that's what I do, but probably not. But I feel like that would be a better thing than inserting my worldview into your story, because it doesn't belong there.
Very powerful, very true. This I found to be really quite rich advice, and I'm taking this one for myself, Thembe. Always keep a little something for yourself, a little money, a little time, a little power.
So that is a paraphrasing and maybe a little bit of an expansion of advice that was given to me at one stage of my life. And I thought it was very interesting because as you go through life, here's somebody advising you to always keep something for yourself with friends, but also with your mate. And can you then, like, how much intimacy can you have with someone if you're always holding something back?
Wow.
And is that level of intimacy the goal? Do we want to have a level of intimacy where we're not holding anything back, which is what I understand by complete intimacy? Or is it okay to have a kind of intimacy with caveats and fine print? Is it still intimacy?
Well, you pose a very interesting question. I mean, the other day I was looking at this quote, and I have no idea who said it, which is very unlike me. And it said, walls keep everyone out, doors show everyone the boundaries show everyone the door. And isn't this also the same dynamic? Like, there's a way in which we can be keeping so much of ourselves, we're actually not doing ourselves any favor. We're not serving the intimacy we desire. We're not actually facilitating. But for us to also have true intimacy, we must have some kind of boundary that where there is a standard setting or a price to pay for what is acceptable and what is unacceptable.
Yes, I suppose you're right. I mean, a friendship in which we are friends is going to have intimacy, but also boundaries. And then a relationship with a spouse is going to have a deeper level of intimacy. And so the boundaries are there to say, okay, you can come this far and no further. But you over there, you can come all the way in.
Okay, very, very interesting that. But also this a little something for yourself, a little money, a little time, a little power. Do you think it was also a bid towards self-care? Like if you're not doing something for yourself, how can you be of service to other people?
I think that is a very elegant and elevated point of view on that piece of advice. I think that's very common advice that people give at occasions like hen parties, where they're encouraging a woman to have her little stash of cash, and similarly her little stash of power, her little stash of secrets. Personally, I would favor a different approach because I do think that you have to start out with the best intention and the best expectation. And until you have reason to do or believe otherwise, that's where you stand. Yeah.
Choose the best option first, always. Yeah, life's too short. Okay, then this not a one-line piece of advice. Nothing matters as much as yourself. Only you matter. You're the one you have to live with the rest of your life. So take care of you first. This can be challenging. Read from the wrong time of life.
Indeed.
Through the wrong window and the wrong perspective can be like, yeah, this is like some covert narcissism, some selfishness.
Absolutely.
In the context of the story, though, I was like, this was the best thing she could have ever said.
Yeah.
Unpack that one for us.
And I think that is the complexity, isn't it, of taking advice from other people. It is it's good advice but is it good for me in my situation?
Yeah.
You know, it's good advice, but it can mean so many different things to so many different people in different situations. So it's my responsibility to read and process and filter accordingly. And I think, again, we're so lazy, emotionally lazy, because we prefer to just be told what to do. And then it doesn't have to be my fault because Selena told me to, right? Whereas actually, the work of life is to live and process and create your own point of view.
Yeah, but that is so very hard, Thembe. I mean, we are not all as clear, concise, articulate, and graceful in putting across our point of view as you are.
Well, thank you.
So, to find one's point of view it is a continual work of life.
Yes.
But it's a brave work to be doing.
Yes.
But it also requires a level of honesty at a personal level where it's kind of easier to just be told what to do, blame the person if it doesn't work out, or fight with them if you get offended. Then you don't have to do the work.
Of course,
you're busy
it's
doing this.
easier. Exactly. Of course, it's easier.
Okay, and then the last piece of advice with a character I personally found challenging, and so I'm doing my own introspection as to what this is revealing about me to myself, was from Thandi. Make sure you always have a girlfriend available to take out your frustrations on. And I was like, we were going somewhere good, and then we got to take out your frustrations on somebody. Why are we lashing out? But it also occurred to me that many of us are very unaware of the fact that this is actually how most of us go through life. If we're unhappy, everyone else around us needs to be unhappy too. And we kind of find company and something good in
Misery loves company.
Yeah. Kind of find a lot more comfort in that.
Yeah. You know, I'm trying to reveal humans as they are, as opposed to as we would like them to be.
Oh, wow, Thembe. That's so brave of you.
I can only try.
Okay, so moving on to love. So this is what I found very interesting. I consider you somebody to be very successful in love and in a 360-degree kind of way. Like
I love that.
Yeah, I see, love popping out of your eyes,
Yeah.
for your mother, for your children, for your husband. And it's something that I particularly admire in you because I don't think many people give themselves that chance in life. I think it's very easy to be, you get disappointed with your family. You want to have that wall against everybody else. And so I find that very, very commendable, and you're living your life forward in a sense, remembering that we all must die, but we must live our life to the full. But in this particular book, there's not one single story that presents a successful romantic relationship. Or so it would seem. Is that by design or coincidence? And what do you have to say to that observation?
I promise that in my next book, people are going to be happy. That is really all I have to say about that. Because what can you do? I mean,
Okay.
the book is written.
Okay, but I know I asked you this earlier about liking your characters, and you were like, oh, but it's like asking me if I like which one of them is my favorite child. That's not how it is. But really, if we just were to look at the men only, we've got Man at the Table in Women Love Men. We've got Ignatius in Hen's Party, and some of the others there. They shall not be named. We've got Honey in Misunderstood. We've got the son in Mother and Father. These are not... Do you like those men?
I do, Selena.
Why?
Because they're so human.
How can you say that?
Because they are so human. And we can be so unforgiving and harsh about basic human characteristics. The guy at the table is negotiating for his job. He's like making a living, and he's doing what he does to make a living. And actually, we all do in our own spaces and our own ways. And then Ignatius is just doing what Ignatius does because that's what he knows. That's
Okay.
what he knows. And so it goes. It's people being human, living out their flawed humanity.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely some of those guys were flawed.
Okay, well, so are the women.
Okay. And then a story that, yeah, I needed to then like go to bed and come back the next day to the book was quite the provocative, but also very funny, Satan and Co. So very provocative, tiptoeing on the line of offensive, and then also very, very funny. Like you spared no wit in talking about these characters, and it was for many reasons. And I'm sure it was by design. And even if you tell me it wasn't, that can never be the truth. So the nicknames alone
Yes.
told a story of their own.
Yes.
And for me, there was almost like a double-sided self-awareness. Like so self-aware, but so blind at the same time. And particularly Cynthia's polarization of the world between this is the real world and this is La La Land. And so when I first read it, I was like, oh, Cynthia, but Cynthia, why? And then when I reflected on it afterwards, because I had to then be like, okay, let's unpack what is being said here. What am I taking away from here? And then I was like, wow, but also Cynthia. And ended up in a place of, I think, very deep compassion and sympathy.
I'm
for
happy to
Cynthia.
hear that.
But it took a while. It took a while. I had to go and pray and think about it. In your personal opinion, are either of the worlds Cynthia describes the real world at all?
I think they both are.
Really?
Yes. I think that La La Land is a real place where real people live and believe what they believe and are happy there.
The Matrix.
But also, the real world is also a real place where people live and believe and are happy there. So, yeah.
Very, very interesting. And that actually led me to my next question, because for me, I was like, both of them are La La Land. And actually, none of us live in the real world. So is there, where is this real world? What is the real, is the real world what we make it? Is it as Cynthia describes? What is the real world?
Well, the world is the real world to you. And that's the point. And that's why it's real, because you're living in it until you're not. And then it's not the real world. You can reflect on that tonight.
I will, Thembe, I will. I will faithfully do my homework. Okay. And then just the last one on Cynthia, because, I think many of us, we want to have a round table around Satan and Co. And we want to talk about Cynthia. We want to talk about Satani.
You know what, Selena? I think a lot of people actually want Cynthia to come to their house with a bottle of wine.
Yes.
And they can have a girl talk.
Yeah, so we need to talk to Cynthia. But before we move on from Cynthia, this is the last question I had. Are any of us actually as self-aware as we believe?
I feel like maybe that is a question for a therapist that I'm not qualified to respond to, honestly, because I don't know. I just don't know.
Okay. Good answer, Thembe. Very good.
I do my best, ma'am.
So as we're winding down this episode, one last question for you is the story Courage. Very interesting. Interesting to me because of its placement in the book. So it's before Words Don't Teach. It's right at the end. And it's almost felt to me like it was like a pre-conclusion. And that you'd done that on purpose. For me, it echoed and answered so many other questions or things that were left unsaid or unfinished in many of the other stories. And what was powerful about this piece is that really it's a description of a woman coming into her own through the coming into her own of the women before her and around her, which was really quite special. Was the placement coincidental, or was this the lead up to the big finish?
No, I was definitely coming to a close and trying to wrap things up as neatly as I could.
Yeah. And this story is so positive. You have a sense of rising hope. You have a sense of possibility, which is the thing I love the most about this story. So the courage is sort of brings us into this space of possibility and freedom. Was it kind of like, also the stories, we've been a bit, I need to leave the people with something good, or was that actually also your intent and motivation?
No, I think only after the book was published and read did I think, oh my goodness, this is a lot of dark stuff. So it wasn't during the writing. And again, remember, some of these stories I started writing 5-10 years ago. And in that year that I committed to producing a book, I was then just finishing them off. So they span a range of experiences and seasons for me as a person. So I think that particular one got included because it needed to be, but not by my conscious action.
Yeah. So it belonged there.
Yes.
It's with its other friends. Okay.
Doing its work in the world.
Yes, doing its work in the world. And the work it did for me was definitely hope, but more so possibilities, which I found very empowering, because it wasn't like you were saying this is how life should be lived, but that you always have an opportunity, to take a different turn. And also how you rationalize, process, and speak to yourself about the things that have come before is hugely important.
Words
in
and other
arriving,
weapons.
to that place. But we're running out of time on this episode. And as you know, we always end every episode with a reading from the author, because we like to give the author the last word. So Thembe, what have you got for us for this episode?
So I thought I would read from cards.
Yes, ma'am.
Ships passing in the night. This is what their marriage had become. After the excitement of being unequally yoked, the drama of family squabbles, the triumph of defying convention and church and all things sensible, they were married. Beyond those first heady days, they soon settled into a monotony that she could not have imagined. Could life really be so dry, so dusty, like objects on display that were never moved? Could living with someone she had chosen, handpicked herself, in fact, be so joyless? How was this her life? Within a year, she'd stopped asking herself these questions. She blamed television and the entertainment industry at large for fueling her fantasies about how married life could be. She knew now that companionship, intimacy, and joy were rarities of relationships, not the norm. At first, she had worked on his image, trading his oversized suits for slicker cuts. His shoes with the curling up toes disappeared as she replaced them with improved versions in black and dark brown only. She was careful to present these changes as gifts because she had heard that men resented it when women tried to change them. Soon, he was a modern, streamlined version of his former self, like a cell phone upgrade. On weekends, he wore linen shirts with his slim-fit jeans rather than the baggy tracksuits. And in the office, everyone started to address him as if he was more senior and more successful than his peers, until he became exactly that.
Thank you, Thembe. Well, it's been another great edition of the book club as we've talked to Thembe Khumalo. See you again next week, same time, as we celebrate another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. Goodbye. This episode was brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe.